The cavern was vast and silent, its jagged walls illuminated by faint, pulsating glyphs that seemed to thrum in time with an unseen heartbeat. Deep within, on a raised dais carved from the very rock, stood the armor. Sleek and otherworldly, it gleamed with an iridescent sheen, its surface a seamless blend of cobalt and black, as if forged from starlight and shadow. It radiated power, palpable even to the untrained, and it waited. It had always been waiting. For centuries, the legendary armor had been the subject of myth and obsession, a relic of the ancients. Beings so advanced their creations defied comprehension. They had vanished long ago, leaving behind only ruins and whispers. And among those whispers was the tale of the armor. Said to be sentient, it was thought to grant unparalleled power to any who could claim it. But no one ever had. Many had tried. The proud Zarnax warriors, towering figures of muscle and might, had believed their strength alone would suffice. The last among them, a brute named Vorthin, had approached with his head held high, only to be reduced to ash the moment his hand reached out. The cunning Droven, masters of manipulation and subterfuge, had sent their brightest minds to decipher the glyphs, hoping to outwit the armor's intelligence. None returned. Even the serene Lutheri sages, revered for their harmony with the universe, had meditated in its presence for weeks, only to leave empty-handed, their gazes filled with quiet despair. The galaxy came to believe the armor was a riddle without an answer. Yet, despite its failures, the legend endured, growing ever larger in the collective imagination. It was both a symbol of ultimate power and the futility of ambition, an enigma that mocked those who sought to possess it. The armor stood unchanged, unmoved, and unclaimed. Until now, Elias Kane had not come to claim the armor. In fact, he hadn't even known it existed until 30 minutes ago. He'd been surveying the barren surface of an uncharted planet, his ship's sensors pinging weak energy readings from below ground. A cave, most likely, or a deposit of minerals, something he could log, sample, and sell to fund the next leg of his exploration. What he found instead had left him speechless. The armor loomed before him now, a presence so commanding it seemed to shrink the cavern around it. Elias approached cautiously, his boots crunching against the crystalline floor. He wasn't a man prone to awe. Life had long since burned that out of him. As an ex-soldier turned explorer, he had seen wonders and horrors in equal measure, and neither moved him much anymore. But this was something else entirely. Hell of a thing, he muttered, his voice swallowed by the cavern's oppressive stillness. He wasn't sure what drew him closer, only that he couldn't stop. The air grew heavier with each step, pressing against his chest, as if the very atmosphere objected to his presence. The glyphs along the walls pulsed faster, brighter, their light casting shifting patterns across his face. When he was close enough to touch it, the armor reacted. A low hum filled the chamber, starting deep and resonant before rising in pitch. Elias froze, his instincts screaming at him to retreat, but his feet refused to move. The glyphs flared, their light converging on the armor in a cascade of brilliance, and suddenly it shifted. Its smooth, unbroken surface began to ripple like water, tendrils of energy unfurling from its form and reaching out toward him. Elias took an involuntary step back, his hand instinctively hovering over the sidearm holstered at his hip. "Okay, easy now," he said, his voice steady despite the panic rising in his chest. The tendrils didn't stop. They moved with purpose, encircling him in a web of light that pulsed in time with the humming. He felt a strange pressure in his head, not painful but insistent, as though something was rifling through his thoughts. "What the hell are you doing?" he muttered, trying to shake off the sensation. Images flooded his mind, unbidden and overwhelming. Memories, not his own, flashed before his eyes. A luminous race of beings forging the armor in the heart of a dying star. Battles waged across galaxies, their scale incomprehensible. And finally, the long, lonely silence that followed their extinction. He saw them place the armor here, felt their desperation, their hope. The images dissolved as quickly as they had come, leaving him gasping for breath. And then came the voice. You are unlike the others. Elias staggered, clutching his head. The voice wasn't spoken aloud. It resonated inside his skull, deep and resonant, layered with tones that defied comprehension. What are you?" He managed, his words shaky. The tendrils of energy tightened around him, and the voice returned, clearer now. "We are what remains, a fragment of those who came before. We endure, searching, waiting. For what? Balance, strength and compassion, chaos and control. These are the qualities of the worthy." Elias frowned, his hand lowering from his weapon. "Well, you got the wrong guy. I'm not exactly balanced, and I'm sure as hell no hero." The tendrils pulsed, as if amused. "Humility, rare?" Before Elias could respond, the tendrils retracted, and the armor began to move again. Its components detached from the dais, hovering in the air around him. He flinched as they swirled, each piece aligning itself with precision before locking into place. It was over in seconds. The weight was immediate, but not unbearable. Elias looked down at his hands, now encased in sleek gauntlets, the faint glow of the glyphs etched into their surface. He felt the armor bond to him, a presence settling into his mind like an old friend. "You were chosen. The first in millennia." Elias exhaled sharply, his heart pounding. He didn't feel chosen. He felt like a man who had just stumbled into something far bigger than himself, and the weight of it pressed down on him as surely as the armor did. "What does that even mean?" he asked, his voice a whisper. The voice didn't answer immediately. Instead, the glyphs on the walls began to dim, one by one, until the cavern was bathed in near darkness. Only the armor's faint glow remained, casting Elias' shadow long and jagged across the floor. "It means the galaxy will soon know your name." Above, the distant rumble of starship engines echoed through the cavern's stillness. The low rumble of engines grew louder, reverberating through the cavern's stone walls. Elias's pulse quickened, his body tensing beneath the alien armor that now encased him. The glow from its surface dimmed slightly, as though adjusting to the shifting threat. He turned toward the cavern entrance, his mind racing. He hadn't seen another soul on this barren planet. Not on the surface, not on his scanners. So who had followed him here? The armor pulsed lightly against his skin, a rhythmic vibration that seemed to resonate with his thoughts. Hostile intent detected. 3 vessels approaching. They seek the artifact. Elias swallowed hard. "You mean me now, don't you?" "Correct." A distant clattering echoed down the cavern, metal striking stone. Whoever these newcomers were, they weren't bothering with stealth. Elias backed away from the entrance, his boots scuffing against the crystalline floor as he searched for cover. His hands, still encased in the armor's gauntlets, twitched with the urge to draw his sidearm, a useless instinct given the sheer power radiating from the armor itself. He crouched behind a jagged outcropping of stone, his breathing shallow. The armor's hum grew louder, its presence settling more deeply into his mind. "Do not retreat. Face them. Easy for you to say," Elias muttered under his breath. "You're not the one they're about to shoot at." The voice returned, calm and resolute. "You underestimate your capability. They will not harm you." Before Elias could respond, figures emerged from the cavern entrance. 3 of them, their forms silhouetted against the harsh light of the outside world. As they stepped into view, Elias took stock of his opponents. 2 were hulking, reptilian figures clad in heavy armor. Zarnak's mercenaries, their crimson scales glinting under the faint glow of the glyphs. Between them strode a smaller figure, lithe and humanoid, with silvery skin that caught the light like liquid mercury. A Drovan, Elias realized. He'd encountered their kind during his years in the military, brilliant strategists but ruthless to the core. The Drovan's gaze swept the chamber, their sharp, predatory eyes narrowing as they spotted the empty dais. Then their attention shifted, locking onto Elias's armored form. "Well," the Drovan said, their voice smooth and calculating, "it seems we're too late to claim the prize. Or perhaps not." The Zarnaks flanked the Drovan, their massive forms bristling with weapons. One of them growled low in its throat, the sound reverberating like distant thunder. Elias rose slowly from his crouch, his movements deliberate. "You're trespassing," he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. The Drovan smirked. "Amusing. You've no idea what you've stumbled into, do you? That armor belongs to no one. Certainly not some human scavenger." "Funny," Elias shot back, taking a step forward. The armor adjusted to his movements with fluid precision, its faint hum growing louder. "It seems to disagree." The Drovan's expression darkened, and they raised a hand. The Zarnax responded immediately, leveling their weapons at Elias. The cavern seemed to hold its breath. Elias tightened his grip on the gauntlets, his muscles coiled. He had no idea what the armor could do, but he trusted it more than the pistol at his hip. "I don't want trouble," he said. "But if you're looking for a fight, I'm not backing down." The Drovan laughed coldly. "A brave sentiment, but misplaced. That armor has rejected the finest warriors in the galaxy. Do you really believe it chose you? Or did you simply trigger its defenses by accident?" Elias said nothing. He didn't fully understand the armor's choice either, but he wasn't about to let them see his uncertainty. The Zarnax to his left took a step forward, a plasma rifle whirring to life in its massive hands. "We take it now," it growled, its voice like grinding rocks. The Drovan waved a hand, signaling the attack. Elias braced himself, but before the Zarnax could fire, the armor reacted. A brilliant surge of light erupted from its surface, flooding the cavern in a blinding glow. The Zarnax staggered, roaring in confusion as their weapons misfired, the plasma bolts ricocheting harmlessly off the walls. The armor guided Elias's movements as though it were an extension of his will. He lunged forward, faster than he'd ever moved in his life, closing the distance between himself and the first Zarnax. A gauntlet fist struck the creature's chest plate, and the force of the blow sent it sprawling to the ground with a deafening crash. The second Zarnax roared in fury, swinging a massive blade at Elias. The armor's energy surged again, forming a shimmering shield that absorbed the strike with ease. Elias countered instinctively, the armor amplifying his strength as he drove the Zarnax back with a series of precise blows. The Drovan watched from the sidelines, their expression shifting from confidence to calculated interest. "Fascinating," they murmured. Elias turned to face them, his breath coming in steady bursts. The Zarnax lay incapacitated at his feet, their weapons shattered, their massive forms groaning in pain. "You still want to try your luck?" Elias asked, his voice tinged with a defiance he hadn't felt in years. The Drovan tilted their head, studying him. "This isn't over," they said, their tone cold and measured. "You may have the armor, but you have no idea what it truly is. When you do, you'll realize it's a burden you're not prepared to bear." With a sharp whistle, they signaled a retreat. The Zarnax dragged themselves to their feet, their movements sluggish, and followed the Drovan back toward the cavern entrance. Elias watched them go, the tension in his body slowly easing. He glanced down at the armor, its glow dimming once more. "You could have warned me about that," he muttered. "You were never in danger," the voice replied, calm and unwavering. "This is only the beginning." Elias exhaled, his mind swirling with questions. The armor's cryptic assurances were far from comforting, and the Drovan's parting words lingered like a shadow. He had survived the encounter, but he knew instinctively that the conflict was far from over. Above him, the faint rumble of departing ships echoed through the cavern, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than before. The silence in the cavern was oppressive, broken only by the faint hum of the armor as it adjusted to Elias's steady breathing. He leaned against the jagged wall, the adrenaline slowly ebbing from his veins. His body ached, not from injury but from the sheer intensity of what had just transpired. He wasn't a stranger to combat, but this had been different. Every movement, every action, had been guided by something beyond him. The armor's presence in his mind was constant, a subtle pressure that refused to let him fully relax. It wasn't intrusive, but it was undeniable. He ran a hand over the smooth surface of the gauntlet, the material cool to the touch despite the energy coursing through it. "I take it that wasn't your first fight," he muttered, his voice echoing faintly in the vast chamber. The armor's voice resonated in his thoughts, calm and steady. Conflict is inevitable. It is the nature of those who seek power. Elias frowned, pushing off the wall. That Droven didn't seem like they were just here for bragging rights. They knew about you. About this place? Many know of us, the armor replied. Few understand. Well, I'd like to understand, Elias said, his tone sharpening. He gestured to the cavern around him, the glowing glyphs now dimmed to a faint shimmer. You've been sitting here for how long? Waiting for someone like me? Why? What's the point of all this? There was a pause, a weighty silence that made Elias wonder if the armor would answer at all. Then, slowly, the voice returned, quieter but no less resolute. We were created to restore balance. The ancients foresaw the destruction that unchecked ambition would bring. They poured their knowledge, their essence, into us. We are the last of them, a fragment of their will. Elias's jaw tightened. He'd heard stories like this before. Powerful relics, ancient civilizations, grand ideals. They always sounded noble until you realized how much blood had been spilled in their name. And what exactly am I supposed to do with that? He asked, crossing his arms. Balance sounds nice on paper, but I'm just one guy. You think I can fix the galaxy? The glyphs along the walls pulsed faintly, as if reacting to his words. You are not expected to repair what is broken alone, but your choices will shape what follows. The galaxy is at a tipping point. Forces gather, seeking domination or destruction. You must decide where you stand. Elias shook his head, frustration bubbling to the surface. I didn't ask for this, he said. I didn't come here looking to save anyone. I just wanted to get by, live my life without. He trailed off, the memories of his past flickering in the back of his mind. The battles, the losses, the faces of those he couldn't save. The armor remained silent, its presence steady but unobtrusive. It didn't argue, didn't push him. Somehow, that made its words linger all the more. A faint beep interrupted his thoughts, emanating from the small device strapped to his wrist. Elias tapped the screen, bringing up a holographic display. His ship's sensors had detected movement, multiple vessels, closing in fast. Great, he muttered, shutting off the display. Looks like our friends brought backup. They will not stop, the armor said. Others will come. The longer you remain here, the greater the risk. Elias sighed, his mind racing. He couldn't stay in the cavern, not with half the galaxy apparently hunting him now. But leaving meant stepping into the unknown, with no idea who or what might be waiting. All right, he said, straightening up. If we're doing this, we're doing it my way. First things first, getting off this rock without getting shot down. The armor seemed to hum in agreement, its energy pulsing faintly against his skin. We will guide you. Elias didn't respond. He made his way toward the cavern entrance, his steps purposeful but cautious. The distant rumble of approaching ships grew louder with every step, vibrating through the stone beneath his feet. As he emerged into the harsh light of the planet's surface, the barren landscape stretched out before him, a sea of jagged rocks and dust, broken only by the silhouette of his ship in the distance. Beyond it, dark shapes streaked across the sky, their engines leaving trails of smoke against the pale horizon. Elias quickened his pace, the armor adjusting seamlessly to his movements. The ground beneath him seemed to blur, each stride carrying him farther than his legs should have allowed. He reached the ship in seconds, the ramp lowering with a hiss as he approached. He darted inside, slamming his hand against the console to seal the entrance behind him. The ship's systems flickered to life, and he slid into the pilot's seat, his hands moving instinctively over the controls. Outside, the approaching vessels were closing in, their forms now visible through the cockpit's reinforced glass. Sleek, angular fighters, Droven design, fast and deadly. Elias muttered a curse under his breath as the first blast rocked his ship, the shields flaring brightly in response. He gripped the controls, his jaw tightening. All right, you wanted me to face this? Let's see what you've got, he said, addressing the armor. The voice responded immediately, calm and unshaken. You will not face it alone. The ship's interface changed suddenly, new readings and symbols flashing across the display. Elias barely had time to register them before the ship surged forward, faster than he'd ever seen it move. The controls responded to his touch with uncanny precision, as though the ship itself had become an extension of the armor's will. The Drovan fighters opened fire, their plasma rounds streaking through the air, but Elias maneuvered effortlessly between them, the ship twisting and rolling with inhuman grace. He lined up a shot and fired, the energy blast striking true and sending one of the fighters spiraling into the ground. The remaining ships adjusted, their formations tightening as they pressed the attack. Elias gritted his teeth, his focus narrowing to the battle at hand. The armor's presence filled his mind, guiding his movements, enhancing his reflexes. "Trust in us," the voice said. "This is only the beginning." Elias didn't respond. He didn't need to. The fight wasn't over, and neither was his journey. The stars burned cold and distant as Elias's ship slipped through the darkness, its engines a low hum against the vast silence. In the passenger seat, the young woman, Marin, she'd said her name was, sat pale and tense, her fingers clutching the straps of her harness. Though she had stabilized from her earlier injuries, the haunted look in her eyes hadn't faded. Elias kept his focus on the navigation display, but his thoughts churned. The pieces were starting to connect. The Drovan, their pursuit of the armor, and now this freighter with its mysterious artifact. He didn't believe in coincidence, not in a galaxy as chaotic as this one. "You're quiet," Marin said suddenly, her voice thin but steady. Elias glanced at her. "Thinking, about what?" He hesitated. "About why the Drovan came after you. You said they wanted an artifact. What was it?" Marin shifted uncomfortably, her hands tightening on the straps. "I told you we didn't know what it was. We were just hired to transport it. Some anonymous client, big payout. Nobody asked questions." She looked away, her voice dropping. "We should have. What did it look like?" Elias pressed. "A sphere," she said after a moment. "Black, with these markings on it. It didn't seem dangerous, but—" She stopped, shaking her head. "They tore through us like we were nothing. They didn't even care about the crew. Just the cargo." Elias's jaw tightened. The description sounded uncomfortably familiar, like something out of the ancient records he'd stumbled across in his travels. Relics of the past, imbued with power no one fully understood. If the Drovan were hunting these things, it meant they weren't just chasing the armor. They were building something bigger. He leaned back in his seat, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "The Drovan don't go after random targets," he said. "Whoever hired you, they knew what they were transporting, and they knew it would attract attention." Marin's eyes narrowed. "Are you saying we were set up?" "I'm saying you were expendable," Elias replied bluntly. Her face darkened, anger flashing beneath the surface. "Then why did you save me?" Elias hesitated, the question catching him off guard. He didn't have a clean answer. Maybe it was guilt, memories of the people he hadn't been able to save before. Maybe it was the armor, pushing him towards something greater than himself. Or maybe it was just that he couldn't stand to see another innocent life snuffed out for someone else's ambition. "Because someone had to," he said finally. Marin studied him, her expression unreadable. Then she looked away, her gaze falling to the gauntlet that encased his hand. "What's with the armor?" she asked. "I saw what it did back there. That's not normal tech." Elias flexed his fingers, the metallic surface gleaming faintly in the dim cockpit light. "It's not tech," he said. "Not exactly. It's older. A relic, like your artifact." Her eyes widened. "You're saying they're connected?" "Maybe," Elias said. "I don't know yet. But if the Drovan are after these things, it means they're more than just old junk. They're dangerous in the wrong hands." "And you think you're the right hands?" Marin asked, a note of skepticism in her voice. Elias let out a dry laugh. "I'm not sure what I am, but the armor chose me, and it hasn't killed me yet. That's got to count for something." Marin didn't respond, her gaze dropping to her lap. Silence settled over the cockpit, heavy and tense. The ship's console beeped, breaking the quiet. Elias leaned forward, scanning the incoming data. A new signal, encrypted but faint. He frowned, his fingers flying over the controls to isolate it. "What is it?" Marin asked, her voice sharp with unease. "Distress signal," Elias said, his tone grim. Same encryption as yours. Her face went pale. It's a trap, she said immediately. Maybe, Elias admitted. But if it's not? He didn't finish the thought. The idea of leaving someone else to die didn't sit right with him. Not after what had happened to Marin's crew. The armor's voice echoed in his mind, calm and unwavering. You cannot save everyone. But you must decide who you will be. Elias clenched his jaw. The armor's cryptic wisdom was starting to wear thin, but it wasn't wrong. Every choice carried weight, and he couldn't afford to hesitate. He adjusted the ship's trajectory, locking onto the signal. We'll take a look, he said. If it's a trap, we'll deal with it. If it's not, someone might need our help. Marin didn't argue, though her hands remained clenched tightly around the straps of her harness. The ship emerged from hyperspace minutes later, the stars stretching back into their familiar patterns. Ahead, a small station loomed in the void, its lights flickering erratically. The distress signal was stronger now, emanating from within the structure. Elias slowed the ship, scanning the station for signs of life. Atmosphere's stable, he said, but I'm not picking up any clear life signs. Could be interference, or a massacre, Marin muttered. Stay here, Elias said, rising from his seat. I'll check it out. Marin shot him a sharp look. Alone? Are you serious? I'm not putting you at risk, he said firmly. She opened her mouth to argue, but the look in his eyes stopped her. Instead, she slumped back into her seat, her expression tight with frustration. Elias didn't wait for her to change her mind. He made his way to the airlock, the armor adjusting around him like a second skin. As the hatch opened, he stepped into the station, his senses on high alert. The interior was eerily quiet, the only sound the faint hum of failing systems. The corridors were dimly lit, the flickering lights casting strange shadows along the walls. He moved cautiously, his every step echoing in the silence. The distress signal was coming from deeper inside, drawing him toward the station's core. As he rounded a corner, a figure emerged from the shadows, a Drovan soldier, his weapon raised. Elias reacted instinctively, the armor surging with energy. In an instant, he closed the distance, disarming the soldier with a fluid motion. The Drovan snarled, his alien features twisted in rage. You're too late, he hissed. It's already begun. Elias frowned, pinning the soldier against the wall. What's begun? The Drovan only laughed, a harsh, guttural sound. You'll see, he said, his voice laced with grim satisfaction. Before Elias could press further, the soldier activated a device on his belt. A blinding light filled the corridor, forcing Elias to shield his eyes. When the light faded, the Drovan was gone, leaving only the faint hum of the station around him. Elias's grip tightened, his mind racing. Whatever the Drovan had been after, it was bigger than he'd realized. And it was far from over.